close to you. Why do...
9 months ago, Karen Carpenter died, apparently as a result of anorexia.
From the moment the Carpenter children entered the world, the family line was drawn without anyone saying a word. Richard, born in 1946, was instantly labeled the gifted one, the child with perfect pitch and a musical destiny that seemed almost divinely assigned. Karen, arriving 4 years later, never received the same light. While Richard's early talents were praised, documented, and proudly announced to relatives, Karen's childhood was filled with quieter moments and a growing awareness that she wasn't the favorite. Their mother, Agnes, had a way of making her admiration unmistakably one-sided, and Karen felt every inch of it. That early imbalance didn't just shape their childhood, it set the emotional foundation for everything that would follow. But as the years unfolded, no one could have predicted how deeply those early wounds would influence Karen's path, or how the silent pressure on Richard would grow. When the Carpenters left Connecticut for California, everything seemed designed for Richard's future. Karen, just 13, struggled to fit into Downey High. Her East Coast accent stood out, and so did her shyness. But fate has a way of revealing hidden gifts at the moment they're needed most. During a music class, Karen tried the glockenspiel, but the real turning point arrived when the school's drummer quit. She asked to step in, and within minutes the conductor knew he'd stumbled onto something rare. Karen mastered complex patterns effortlessly, her rhythm steady, instinctive, and almost mesmerizing. While her mother barely noticed, Karen had finally found a place where she wasn't in Richard's shadow. And though she didn't know it yet, this new passion would spark the first real connection between the siblings, one built on music, not competition. But the next discovery would change their lives forever. Richard had always been surrounded by admiration, but nothing prepared him for the moment he realized Karen possessed something extraordinary. It wasn't just her rhythm, though that alone was impressive. It was the way she absorbed music, the natural flow that even seasoned players struggled to match. As they practiced together, Richard began to understand that Karen wasn't simply talented. She was special. For the first time, the praise wasn't all directed at him, and instead of jealousy, he felt excitement. This was a partner, a collaborator, someone who elevated his own ideas. Karen, who'd grown up feeling invisible, finally found someone who truly saw her. Their bond deepened with every rehearsal. But music has a way of revealing even greater truths. And soon, a moment would arrive that Richard later described as the instant everything changed. The moment he heard Karen's voice. By the mid-1960s, the Carpenter siblings were honing a sound that didn't quite fit the era, but still carried something unmistakably compelling. With bassist Wes Jacobs, they formed the Richard Carpenter Trio and entered the 1966 Hollywood Bowl Battle of the Bands. Against groups twice their size and far more aligned with the rock trends of the day, they shocked everyone by winning. Richard's jazz arrangement, Iced Tea, caught the judges' attention, and for a brief moment, it seemed like their big break had arrived. RCA offered them studio time, but the industry didn't know what to do with a group mixing jazz, classical precision, and a teenage girl on drums. The trio dissolved, but the spark remained. Karen still preferred the security of her drum kit, and Richard was desperate to find the right sound. He just didn't realize that the key to unlocking it was already beside him. It happened almost by accident. During rehearsals, Karen casually sang, "I'll Be Seeing You," treating it like a simple warm-up. But when Richard heard her voice, he froze. There was warmth, clarity, and a haunting softness that cut through the room. This wasn't the shy girl hidden behind drums. This was a sound the world had never heard before. In that instant, Richard knew everything had to change. He began arranging songs around her contralto, guiding harmonies to spotlight her tone, crafting melodies that let her voice do the work. Karen didn't yet understand her power. She still thought of herself primarily as a drummer who sang on occasion. But Richard saw the future forming in front of him. And soon, the world would discover it too, beginning a rise that would bring fame, pressure, and pain neither sibling was prepared for. By 1969, Richard was exhausted from failed auditions and endless rejections. The industry still didn't understand the Carpenters. Too soft for rock, too gentle for the rising counterculture. But everything changed when a slowed, emotional demo of Ticket to Ride landed on the desk of Herb Alpert at A&M Records. He wasn't just intrigued, he was captivated. Alpert heard something no one else had taken seriously: Karen's unique tone and Richard's meticulous arrangements. Within days, meetings were arranged. Karen, still only 19, had to bring her parents to co-sign the contract because she wasn't old enough to sign for herself. She arrived quiet, anxious, and unsure if she belonged in such a polished environment. Yet Alpert believed in them immediately. For Richard, it finally felt like validation after years of pushing against the industry's expectations. But neither sibling understood how dramatically the signing would reshape their lives. Fame was approaching fast, and with it came pressures they had never imagined. Their first album under A&M, originally titled Offering and later rebranded as Ticket to Ride, didn't explode onto the charts. Sales were modest, reviews mixed, and the label debated whether the duo truly had a place in the evolving music scene. Yet those who listened closely heard something unmistakably different. Karen's voice, still unrefined but already haunting, drew quiet praise from musicians and insiders. Even critics who dismissed the album's commercial potential admitted her tone lingered long after the final track. Richard took the lukewarm response as fuel. He studied arrangements obsessively, experimenting with harmonies, layering vocals, and searching for the exact sound that would let Karen's voice bloom. Behind closed doors, the siblings were working harder than ever, unaware that they were only months away from the song that would change everything. What seemed like a small step forward was actually the calm before a worldwide storm. Everything shifted in 1970 with the release of They Long to Be Close to You. The moment the song hit radio stations, the response was immediate. It soared to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed there for 4 straight weeks. Practically overnight, the Carpenters transformed from overlooked newcomers into national sensations. Karen, just 20, suddenly had one of the most recognizable voices in America. Richard understood the magnitude of this moment and doubled down on arrangements that highlighted Karen's softness and emotional clarity. Concert bookings flooded in, interviews lined their schedules, and the press labeled them the fresh, wholesome faces of American pop. At first, it felt like a dream, a validation that seemed impossible only a year earlier. But rapid fame comes with a hidden cost. The pressure wasn't just rising, it was beginning to consume the quiet, private world Karen had always relied on to feel safe. And soon, the spotlight would grow blinding. Only months after Close to You became a phenomenon, the Carpenters released We've Only Just Begun, a song originally crafted for a bank commercial. Richard heard potential and persuaded Paul Williams and Roger Nichols to expand it. The result was a track that tapped directly into the nation's heart. It reached #2 on the Billboard Hot 100 and spent 7 weeks at #1 on the adult contemporary chart. Couples across America adopted it as their wedding anthem, and the Carpenters officially became the soundtrack of an entire generation's most hopeful moments. Concert venues sold out, award nominations poured in, and the siblings began winning Grammys. But beneath the acclaim, Karen felt the pressure tightening. She was suddenly the centerpiece of the duo, her voice defining their brand, while Richard carried the weight of production perfectionism. Their public success masked private battles that were quietly intensifying, setting the stage for the emotional fractures ahead. While audiences adored Karen's voice, they wanted more than sound. They wanted to see her. Managers pushed her to step away from the drums, insisting that a front-and-center singer was essential for live performances. For Karen, losing the drum kit meant losing her shield. Behind it, she felt grounded. Without it, she felt exposed. Stage fright tightened around her, and each performance became a test she struggled to endure. Critics complained the concerts lacked a visual focal point, and that pressure fell directly on her shoulders. By 1972, her drumming appearances were reduced to brief showcases, while most of the show required her to stand at the microphone under a harsh spotlight. Karen admitted privately that she still considered herself a drummer who sings. Yet every year that identity slipped further away. And this internal conflict would soon feed into the emotional strain, family tension, and dangerous habits that were forming just out of public sight. Even as the Carpenters climbed the charts, the atmosphere at home never changed. Agnes Carpenter still treated Richard as the genius, and Karen as the afterthought, no matter how many hits Karen delivered. Friends noticed that Karen often sought approval in small ways, sharing new achievements, hoping for praise that rarely came. Agnes would nod politely, then turn to celebrate Richard's arrangements or his latest compositional success. Karen's voice had become the centerpiece of their fame, yet her mother couldn't bring herself to acknowledge it. The emotional imbalance that began in childhood only deepened as the spotlight grew brighter. Richard, driven and perfectionistic, absorbed the pressure by working harder. Karen internalized it. She smiled for interviews, sang flawlessly on stage, and hid the growing ache behind her calm tone. But the more the world adored her, the more she realized that the person she wanted validation from the most would never give it. With success came an intensity that few outsiders understood. Richard's standards were impossibly high, and every recording session became a pursuit of spotless execution. The Carpenters' sound depended on precise harmonies and careful layering, and Richard refused to accept anything less than perfection. Tours expanded rapidly, 174 concerts in 1973 alone. There were TV specials, rehearsals, studio time, press appearances, and constant traveling. Karen barely had space to breathe. Her natural tendency to please others only pushed her to meet every demand, even when her body strained under the pace. Richard wasn't trying to harm her. He was trapped in the pressure to maintain their success. But the relentless schedule began chiseling cracks into Karen's mental and physical health. She was young, exhausted, and losing control of the one thing she could never escape: her own image. The perfection the world admired was slowly becoming the burden she could no longer carry. As the workload intensified, Karen's physical changes became harder to ignore. Fans whispered about her shrinking figure, but few understood what they were seeing. In the early 1970s, eating disorders weren't publicly discussed, and most people had never even heard the term anorexia. Karen brushed aside concerns, insisting she was just maintaining her appearance for the stage. But the truth was far darker. The pressure to stay slim, the stress of being constantly watched, and the feeling of being emotionally overlooked converged into something dangerously consuming. Band members noticed her fainting spells, her tiny meals, her long hours spent obsessing over her figure. yet everyone around her felt uncertain about how to intervene. Doctors misdiagnosed her or underestimated the severity. Richard sensed something was wrong, but neither sibling had the language to understand it. What began quietly and invisibly was now spiraling into a battle Karen fought alone. In 1975, the cracks finally widened. During their European tour, Karen's frailty could no longer be hidden behind stage lighting or tailored outfits. Audiences gasped when she walked on stage, her figure alarmingly thin, her movements strained. Midway through the tour, her body simply gave out. The Carpenters abruptly canceled the remaining dates, officially citing exhaustion. But exhaustion didn't explain why Karen struggled just to stand, why her clothes hung off her body, or why she was desperately trying to keep up a pace that was destroying her. Behind the scenes, those closest to her whispered about unnamed illnesses, cancer, or mysterious medical issues. No one dared speak the real word, anorexia, because almost no one recognized it. Karen returned home shaken, ashamed, and terrified that her weakening health would jeopardize the career she felt responsible for maintaining. The silence surrounding her illness became the perfect storm for what came next. After the tour collapse, Karen attempted to regain control, but the illness tightened its grip. She began restricting food more severely, forming habits that no one around her had the experience to recognize. Friends saw her shrinking, but she dismissed their concerns with humor or practiced deflection. In interviews, she insisted she simply had a small frame, hiding the panic beneath the polished smile. Behind closed doors, she weighed herself obsessively and pushed her body far past its limits. The pressure to remain the public's sweet-voiced icon only intensified her fear of gaining weight. Richard, overwhelmed with work and battling his own challenges, didn't fully see the depth of her suffering. And Agnes, still emotionally distant, offered no comfort. Karen was surrounded by people yet more alone than ever. Her disorder wasn't just consuming her physically, it was slowly eroding her sense of self, and the fallout was only beginning. In 1975, just as Karen's health was becoming impossible to ignore, an unexpected headline swept through the music world. Playboy magazine released its annual music poll, and to everyone's surprise, Karen Carpenter was ranked the 10th best drummer in the world, higher than John Bonham of Led Zeppelin. The result caused a stir, with Bonham reportedly furious at being placed below a singer best known for soft pop ballads. But for Karen, the recognition was a rare moment of joy. She laughed about the E.T. controversy in interviews, insisting she admired Led Zeppelin. Yet privately, the poll struck a painful chord. It reminded her of the identity that had quietly been stripped away. She once felt safe behind those drums, protected from the spotlight's scrutiny. Now she stood center stage, fragile and exposed, her true passion reduced to brief moments in live shows. The poll was supposed to be an honor, but to Karen, it was also a reminder of everything she had lost. As Karen's condition worsened, her therapist, Stephen Levenkron, urged the family to participate in sessions. He believed understanding their emotional dynamics was crucial to her recovery. Richard sat across from his sister, finally given a space to express the love and concern he'd struggled to articulate for years. He told Karen he loved her, that she mattered, and that he needed her to survive this battle. Karen listened, overwhelmed, tears quietly forming. Then Levenkron turned to Agnes, inviting her to share something supportive, anything that might help her daughter feel valued. But Agnes couldn't do it. Not a simple, "I love you." Not even an acknowledgement of Karen's suffering. The silence in that room pierced Karen more deeply than any criticism. Richard later admitted that moment haunted him for decades. It was the clearest evidence of the emotional void Karen had carried since childhood. A void no fame could ever fill. In 1979, the carefully managed Carpenter image began to fracture when Richard entered rehab for his addiction to Quaaludes. With her brother temporarily out of the picture, Karen saw a rare opening to step out of the boundaries that had defined her career. She traveled to New York and began working with producer Phil Ramone, whose portfolio included Paul Simon and Billy Joel. For the first time, Karen was recording music entirely on her own terms. She explored bolder styles, disco rhythms, jazz-infused arrangements, and lyrics that showed a more mature, emotionally complex version of herself. The sessions were electric. Industry veterans praised her versatility, stunned by how different she sounded when freed from the constraints of the Carpenter's image. Karen felt empowered, imagining a life beyond Downey, beyond family expectations, beyond the shadows that had always followed her. But not everyone would welcome this new version of her. When Karen returned to California with her completed solo album, she was proud, hopeful even. This was the first time she had shaped her own artistic identity. But when she played the tracks for Richard and A&M executives, the room went cold. Richard, newly out of rehab, felt blindsided and threatened by the idea of Karen branching out alone. Herb Alpert called the album unreleasable, criticizing its direction. Karen sat there, stunned, watching her dream being ripped apart by the people she trusted most. The project was shelved permanently, and to add insult, she was charged the full $400,000 production cost, deducted from future Carpenter royalties. The rejection crushed her confidence. Friends later said she never fully recovered from the humiliation. It wasn't just an album being buried. It was her voice, her independence, her chance to be seen as more than the sweet, controlled frontwoman the world expected. Amid the heartbreak of the failed solo project, Karen met Tom Burris, a polished real estate developer who seemed to offer the stability she desperately craved. He was charming, confident, and attentive, everything Karen believed she needed. Within 2 months, they were engaged, shocking even her closest friends. Karen longed for a family of her own, a new beginning away from the chaos of fame. Burris appeared to be that escape, but beneath his polished exterior lay the truth she wouldn't learn until it was too late. Days before the wedding, Karen discovered he had undergone a vasectomy years earlier and had no intention of reversing it. For someone who dreamed of children, the blow was devastating. She turned to her mother for support, but Agnes dismissed her pain, insisting the wedding must go on. Alone and heartbroken, Karen walked down the aisle, beginning a marriage built on deception, debt, and emotional collapse. Once the wedding dust settled, the truth about Tom Burris unraveled quickly. He wasn't the successful developer he claimed to be. He was drowning in debt. Karen, eager to make her marriage work, began loaning him enormous sums. $35,000 here, $50,000 there, desperately hoping stability would follow. Instead, the financial drain only worsened his temper. Friends noticed Karen arriving to dinners in oversized sunglasses, trying to hide tears and bruised emotions. Burris mocked her fragile body, calling her a bag of bones, weaponizing the insecurity that already haunted her. Karen, who dreamed of love and children, found herself trapped with a man who belittled her at her weakest moments. Her family offered little support, Agnes insisting Karen simply endure the marriage she had chosen. Karen's illness deepened under the stress, and the once bright hope of a fresh beginning became another devastating chapter she felt powerless to escape. By 1981, Karen's health was deteriorating at a terrifying pace. She began relying on extreme methods to maintain her shrinking frame. Up to 90 laxatives a day, thyroid medication obtained under a false name, and a level of self-punishment that her loved ones struggled to comprehend. Her weight plummeted to a shocking 77 pounds. She confided in Richard, admitting she needed help, but unable to break the cycle on her own. Fame only complicated recovery. She still felt responsible for the Carpenter's future, even as her own life was slipping out of control. Public appearances became alarming spectacles. Audiences gasped at her frail figure, unsure whether they were witnessing illness or exhaustion. Karen finally agreed to treatment with psychotherapist Stephen Levenkron, hoping structure would save her. But the eating disorder had taken firm hold. Every step toward healing was met with fear, conflict, and the crushing pressure to recover quickly. In 1982, Karen's struggle reached its breaking point. She traveled to New York for intensive treatment, where Levenkron tried to stabilize her physically and emotionally. At one stage, he confiscated the medications she had been abusing, a move that left her shaken but necessary. Eventually, she was admitted to Lenox Hill Hospital and placed on intravenous nutrition. The doctor's efforts helped her gain 30 pounds in weeks, but the rapid change strained her weakened heart. Friends who visited said she seemed both hopeful and frightened, caught between wanting to recover and fearing the weight gain that her mind couldn't fully accept. The pressure from her family, her career, and her failing marriage weighed heavily. She wanted a quick fix, a sudden return to normal life, but such solutions didn't exist. Karen left the hospital appearing stronger, yet beneath the surface, her heart and body remained dangerously fragile. Despite the turmoil of the past years, Karen entered late 1982 with what appeared to be renewed optimism. She sang Christmas carols at the Buckley School, her voice still stunning despite her frail frame. At the 25th anniversary of the Grammy Awards in January 1983, she surprised everyone with a lively, almost glowing demeanor. Dionne Warwick later recalled Karen joking, "Look at me, I've got an ass," as if trying to convince everyone, including herself, that she was finally turning a corner. On February 1st, she visited Richard, excitedly discussing future projects and even the possibility of touring again. For the first time in years, it felt like the siblings had a path forward. But behind the hope was a fragile balance her body couldn't sustain. With divorce papers awaiting her signature and emotional wounds still raw, Karen was standing at the edge of recovery and unknowingly close to tragedy. On the morning of February 4th, 1983, Karen prepared to finalize her divorce. She was at her parents' home in Downey when she suddenly collapsed in a walk-in closet. Paramedics found her heart beating only 6 times per minute. At 9:51 a.m., she was pronounced dead at Downey Community Hospital. She was just 32. The autopsy revealed she'd died of heart failure caused by emetine cardiotoxicity, the result of years of anorexia and ipecac misuse. Her passing shattered her family, but no one felt the blow more deeply than Richard. He admitted later that he'd seen the signs but didn't know how to stop them, haunted by the memory of their therapy session when he expressed love. His mother never could. In the years that followed, Richard devoted himself to preserving Karen's legacy, remastering albums, releasing compilations, and eventually letting the world hear her long-shelved solo project. Every note carried both pride and unimaginable pain. Behind the harmonies was the sister he couldn't save.